That is me. Thank you for coming. In this session, I'm going to be talking about something that I've come to see as a really core process for learning, one that can be usefully applied in different ways across a number of different disciplines to increase learner engagement and the possibilities of transformative learning. And I'm calling this the process of translation. So I'm not arguing that this is a novel process. I'm not going to say, oh, look at this brand new thing that I've discovered. That's not what it is. Instead, what I'm contending is that often when our students are really engaged and when we see them have that aha moment that somebody was talking about at the fireside chat yesterday, it's because translation is what they're doing and that we can understand it as translation. And that as teachers, we can use that concept of translation both for creating new assignments and for assessing the assignments that we currently have, both for how they can help to contribute to critical engagement and also open up further possibilities for transformative learning. So in this way, what I'm doing is both presenting something we can use more consciously to build effective teaching and learning strategies and providing a way to unpack and understand when and how translation is part of transformative learning. So in addition to defining what I mean by translation, I'm going to be presenting an assignment that I've used that really actively harnesses the process of translation as a way to exemplify the process. Because sometimes you can talk about all the ideas behind it, but unless you see it in action, it's hard to understand. So that's why I have various odd-looking things on the table in front of me. So by examining the learning processes behind the assignment, what I'm hoping to offer is a vision of teachers and learners as translators that travels across different materials and disciplines. So it's a viewpoint that as educators, we can use in building and assessing assignments and exercises to support increased engagement and comprehension, that use both affective and rational components of learning, and that draw from the strengths that we know exist in multiple ways in our classrooms and across all sorts of different varied learners. So that's basically what I'm up to. So I'm going to give you a bit of a roadmap to what I'm up to. So where we're going. So the outcomes and goals for this session include providing an understanding of how this concept of translation can help increase learner engagement and comprehension. Here I'm going to go over the example, and I'll also be drawing from good old Bloom's taxonomy, so we will be looking at that one again. I'm going to explore how translation combines rational and affective learning and therefore increases the likelihood of transformative learning. Explore how the concept of translation relates to Gardner's theories of multiple intelligences. And we'll also do a discussion and brainstorming exercise component where we're going to talk about how translation might be included into what you're doing in the classroom or may already be included in what you're doing in your classes. So the first thing that I need to do is, actually I keep saying the word translation, what is it that I'm actually talking about? So defining translation, first let me give you a bit of backstory. I'm going to back up a little bit. So the way that I've come to think about this is through the very scientific process of trial and error over years of teaching. So I teach in sociology. I've been teaching in sociology both here and where I did my graduate work for about 15 years. I didn't do my graduate work for 15 years. I've just been teaching for a total of 15 years. That can happen. That's valid. Right? But in that time, there have been a number of different kinds of exercises and assignments that I've tried. And students respond to kinds of exercises that seem to have something in common. So I started thinking about what those exercises all had in common to see if I could pull something out that would be useful for us as teachers in building assignments. So when I say that I got positive responses from students, what I mean is that people reported that they understood the material better and that they really enjoyed themselves, and that what we did changed how they thought, not just what they were thinking about. Right? So it wasn't just, oh, now I can think this idea. It's now, oh, I'm looking at all these other things that I used to think, and I'm thinking about them differently. I also noticed that people gained a fuller understanding of the concepts and materials of the course, that they were able to apply the concepts and materials to use them differently, not just in class, but in other conversations. And then I saw that when I had multiple students take multiple classes with me in other courses, and then also as graduate students. So when looking at the kinds of assignments that that provided that kind of response from students, I noticed that one of the things that they had in common is that they all require students to engage in a really similar process. They require people to transform information from one form or format into another. So the procedure of translation, as I'm seeing it, happens when students create something, and when so it's not just reproduction, it's the creation of something new. Here is a concept. I would like you to translate it into something else, and that can look a number of different ways, and we'll talk about the ways that it can look at. But transforming information from one form or format to another is not just a reproduction, right? It's not just, there it is. This is what it was in the textbook, and here it is again. It's creating something new, right? And it also includes a reflection on the process and on the connections between the original and what was produced. And that's really important to how it works. So the creation, while it is the student's own, is a transformation. It's a translation of information from one form or format to another. And in performing that translation and reflecting on it, the possibilities of transformative learning increase. Okay? And I'm going to talk more about why that is and how that is in a little bit, because it's not just about the content for the course. But as is the case with any kind of translation when you're talking about from French to Spanish or English to German, it's never going to be a mimetic representation. So that's part of why it's creation. And really good translations in literature always have a note from the translator, right? So this is, that reflection on the process is like the note from the translator, right? This is why, this is how, because we can't go from one form of representation to another and have it be exactly the same. So I'll give you an example now, which I hope will clarify if this is looking a little bit muddy. So I teach a required course in sociology, which is contemporary theory, and it is sometimes referred to as the bee sting room, when you're like, I have to take contemporary theory, oh my God, I'm gonna like bang my head against the wall. So then they get a little bit more afraid when they see the syllabus, because we do the collage assignment. So one of the main final project is that people need to make a collage in response to themes and ideas that are brought up by any of the readings. It has to also have a 5 to 6 page write-up that outlines what the reading is, what the collage is a response to, whether they've picked one concept, one reading, one theorist, and it explains why they've done what they've done, right? Why did you use this color? Why did you put this here? How is this placed on the page in this way important? How can you interpret your own interpretation, right? So that's what that 5 to 6 page reflection is. There's a really wide range of work that I receive for this, and people are absolutely terrified, right, as you can imagine, right? At the end of the day, pretty much across the board, everybody says, that was the best part of the class. That was fantastic, right? And there have been a number of graduate students who I've seen develop what they did at the master's level from what they did in 3160, because that was the one that they really understood and really wanted to be able to work with more and apply. So I've got some examples to show you. I'm not going to go into the social theory, because then I won't ever shut up. But I will. You'll just have to trust me that they all did a good job, and I do have permission to show their work. So this is a response to Foucault, and it's based around the quotation, visibility is a trap. Can you tell? This is made out of matches. So it's written in matches, glue gunned, so that if you were to light it here, it would all go up in flames. It was important. She talked about how visibility is a trap, because as soon as you have the light to see, the frame that holds it is going to be disintegrated over the course of time. It was wicked, a really interesting way. And she's got all the words there, a whole bunch of different things. It was very fun. This one is a portrait of Omar Little, who's a character from the HBO series The Wire. It is also a collage representing how that character can be understood using central concepts from Bourdieu. Every single piece of this is representative both of different parts of the different types of capital and that Bourdieu talks about, and the character, all in conjunction. So I have it up in my office, and I was like, please let me keep it. I really like it. We also have this, which is Bourdieu again. It's a tabletop. I didn't know where to put it, and it hurt to throw it out at the end of the term. So it was half the size of this table. It's 2 full place settings. So that was about different understandings of class and taste and distinction from Bourdieu. Okay? I've also had students hand in contrasting foods, salads and cupcake, in order to understand intersectionality. We can talk about that if you want to, but we don't have to. It was delicious to Mark, which is a good thing. Yeah, I will confess that happened. I can't give it back to you. These are modern and postmodern frames of reference. And this is a response to the idea of cultural and symbolic capital. The essay is still inside of it. It's made out of broken up vinyl records, and it matters what the records are, and it matters that it's open, that you can open it, you can close it, it matters that it's portable. All of these things matter and were interpretations of the theory. So these are examples of some of the things. Now, I've brought the ones which give you the wow factor, right? There have also been really, really good ones, which are stick figures running down a road with like thought bubbles and song lyrics and all the rest of it, where artistic talent, no. Really good, yes, absolutely. So at the beginning of term, I have others that I show and I say, you can do all of this, and also you can do this. What matters most is the reflection on what it is that you've made. So I use this collage example as a way to talk about translation because it makes really clear what is often happening as the students engage with course materials in a process of translation. So they've transferred information from one form, from just a text, into another one, into some form of some aesthetic form. And I'm very clear that that's what I want them to do, to create an aesthetic form. They can do something with film if they want. They can do food, as I mentioned. They could do music. All of these things are possible. It's not just reproduction. It's the creation of something new. And it includes a reflection on the process and on the connections between the original and on what was produced. So how is it? So I noticed that this was happening because it happens in other kinds of assignments as well. But then I started wondering, how is it that that is increasing learner engagement and comprehension, how we can better understand that. So how do we understand and theorize this pedagogically? So I promised you Bloom's. So here's Bloom's. As you are likely familiar with, Bloom's taxonomy classifies different levels of learning, with the ones that are at the bottom being seen as foundational to the ones at the top. And the way that we often interpret that is, before you can understand, first you have to remember. Before you can apply, first you have to understand, right? So we see it as sort of building up in that way. This kind of understanding the levels of learning can sometimes lead to designing our teaching from the bottom up. And that's how we often try and do the curriculum design because of our understanding of Bloom's taxonomy. I'm not so sure that's the best way, which is my gentle way of saying I'm pretty sure that's wrong. So while it seems logical, it means that when we start there, the source of learning is outside the student, right? Because in order to remember something, you have to remember what? That thing over there. In order to, how do I understand something? You have to explain something. Explain what? That idea over there. So the source of learning isn't as student-centered as I would like to see it be. So with a translation exercise like the collage project, you end up turning Bloom onto its head, right? And you throw students in at the top of the pyramid. So no kidding, it's terrifying, right? It's not surprising that people are scared when you ask them to start at the highest level, but everybody can do it. I've never had a student who is not able to do that. All of us can create something in response to something we've read. It's a high bar, but it's a bar that everybody can reach. And once you've made it, what you've made, you have to reflect on, you have to explain it, you have to evaluate it, you have to analyze it. You end up addressing all of these different levels. You can't create something in response without remembering what you're talking about, right? You can't create something in response without understanding it. You can't tell me why the beads are in the middle of this if you haven't been able to apply and synthesize the information. It's not possible. So it's starting at the top and assuming that students can reach that and then seeing what happens next. So that explains part of the how, but I also want to ground this in some of the other scholarship on teaching and learning and draw from Mezirow's theory of transformative learning and the ways that it's been developed from his initial more rational conceptions to also include affective components of learning. I also want to talk a bit about Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences in order to better explain what I mean by translation and explore how that harnesses and strengthens multiple intelligences by including both rational and affective learning. So from Mezirow and those who've worked with and further developed his theory, we get the following explanations: that learning is transformative when it involves a shift in perspective that changes how we move through the world. So it's not that it's just transmission of information. Here, I give you this, now you have it. I am the font of all knowledge. You have this knowledge. You go and you take it and you do your thing. It's also something that extends beyond the transactional, right? So it's not, I give you this and I also acknowledge that you have your own experiences that you bring to the table. It pushes it a little bit further, and it's that recognition where there's a recognition and an analysis of previously held assumptions that result in a shift of the frames that affect behavior. Right? So in the literature on transformative learning, this is understood with the articulation of a whole bunch of different possible steps. It's not that they're all necessary, but some of the things that it usually includes are that there is a disorienting dilemma, like, welcome to social theory, you're going to make some art. What? Right? And that there's also critical reflection and perspective transformation, the recognition and analysis of previously held assumptions. So in the example of the collage assignment, the disorienting dilemma is often that moment of being asked to start at the top of Bloom's. And people are really, really scared. They're really upset. I don't understand. What is it that you want? What do you want from me? I don't know, actually. You're going to tell me, right? And it's not something where I know a good one when I see it, but I can't tell you how to do a good one, right? And that also changes what the learning dynamic is in the classroom. So what's really disorienting is that I'm asking them to make something, not to show me what I've given them, right? And that's probably the most disorienting thing. I think, to me, well, people do have fears that are disoriented. They're disoriented a bit because they don't want to have to do something aesthetic. Like, I can't draw, I don't know how to do this. But fundamentally, it's because they're being asked to make something rather than to just say, here, that's what you gave to me, right? So I'm asking them to engage in a process of reciprocity in the classroom, right? And acknowledging that that is what's going to build the learning community, which is an entirely different model than people are often used to, right? And people have not often had that, particularly in lower level classes. So there are two parts of critical reflection that are required in order to do the translation. They have to reflect on the material and what they find interesting in it, but then they also have to reflect on what they have created. Why did I think this way? Why did I make it this way? What are the reasons behind the ways I've made this? And it's in the second stage of that reflection that the possibility of transformation lies. I am not saying that everybody who does this collage comes out transformed. That's not what I mean. We can't, and we've seen this in some of the other presentations in the past couple of days, transformative learning is something that you can try and open a door to, but whether somebody walks through the door, it's not entirely up to you. It's not in our control. But that's where the assignment encourages them to make that transition. What's interesting also is that it's not just a reflection on the conscious motivations for doing it. You build something and then you realize that you've built something that you can interpret to tell you more about the theory that you're talking about than you knew in the first place, right? And that's like, whoa. And people are like, look, I didn't even realize that, but that's what happened with the visibility as a trap. She said, and then I looked at it and I realized if I lit it on fire, the frame would burn. And I went back to the text. And I realized, so that is part of it, so that some of it is about harnessing that kind of serendipity. Am I up for time? Okay. So moving on to Gardner. You may be familiar with Gardner's theory. even if it's just in the ways that get used in popular culture when people talk about different types of learners, as how people often talk about it. In a really brief summary, the central idea is that intelligence and by extension learning is multifaceted. So this diagram outlines the 9 facets of Gardner's theory. So when I'm talking about translation, what I'm talking about is asking students to build bridges between these facets of intelligence. So you've got the verbal linguistic and the musical, the visual spatial, so bodily kinesthetic would be a translation from the verbal linguistic to bodily kinesthetic would be, I would like you to do an interpretive dance about this, which I don't ask people to do. If they want to, that's okay. But just in terms of articulating what I mean by translation, this is another way to think about it. If you're not keen on doing something which is asking people to do art, if you look at the different types of learning, translation across any of these can provide the same opportunities. So the collage assignment demands connection between the verbal linguistic and the visual spatial, or it could be to the musical. There are all sorts of different ways that people interpret the assignment. And it can also be interpersonal because people end up often doing personal reflections that are part of it, right? So I had one student hand in the Bible that she grew up with all of her notations in it and her transformation of her own understandings of spirituality with like candy bar wrappers. It was fascinating and incredibly personal, right? She's not required to do that. Nobody is required to do something personal, but if making that translation into personal is something which will help in the learning, then that can be appropriate. I want to make really clear that I am not reading Gardner's multiple intelligences learning styles for individuals, and I'm not taking up the debate that exists around that. Instead, I'm just using those categories as different facets of intelligence that all of us possess. So, of course, a lot of what I've said here we know instinctively without making the connections consciously to Bloom's taxonomy or Gardner's or multiple intelligence theories and all that. It doesn't always look so artistic or as out there as the collage project. So lab experiments a lab experiment assignment is a hands-on classic example of effective experiential learning where students make processes happen, which they've read about, write up a lab report that includes their observations. These 3 are all translations, right? So lab experiments, journals, verbal linguistic to interpersonal, in-class debates, verbal linguistic to interpersonal. They're all different kinds of learning assignments that people report have really good learning outcomes, right? And all of them have that element of translation to them. How am I doing for time? Oh gosh, we're fine then. Am I talking way too fast? Probably. Usually. Oh, I've got that down. Yeah, I won't assign it, but I'll do it. Yeah. What? Oh, no recording in the classroom. That's not okay. So what I'd like to do, because I've talked for long enough, is I want to turn it over and see if we can brainstorm some stuff. You can get into pairs if you like. And I want us to talk about the kinds of things that you've done or you do in your classes or at work that you think use translation, right? And then to think about if you use translation in a way that makes it more, that takes it to transactional, or does it push it that's a step further into transformational, or what might you be able to do to push it so that it could be more transformational, right? So it could be coming up with new assignments in the area that you work in. It could be looking at old assignments and saying, yeah, I see this map on. So if you want to get into pairs and just take a couple minutes, and then we can come back to the group and we can talk about it a little bit and brainstorm a little bit further. Does that make good sense? Do you want me to come around? Introduce yourselves. If you don't know each other, what's your favorite color?
answer all the questions. Yeah, and then it's just, now it's
Good night. How's everybody doing? Do we have some ideas? Let me fix my... So if we can come back into the larger group. I only have a little bit of space to write, and I have awful handwriting. So whatever chicken scratch it is, what I've written down is what I just said, right? And that's as good as it gets, because I did not pay attention to my grade 3 teacher who said, this is going to matter one day. I'm sorry, Bev, you're right. Oh, well. So what kinds of things did you come up with? Do you have things that you are already doing that you can see are part of this? What kinds of things were those? Different assignments that you use? Yeah?
We do one, it's kind of similar to what you do, but we do it with first-year students and from the nursing faculty.
Okay.
And we look at getting students to represent empathy.
Okay, cool.
You know, we put in a visual piece, or it doesn't actually have to be visual, it can be any medium. So they could do interpretive dance, and I say that to them. I said, if you want to represent empathy through interpretive dance, fill your boots. Because it's not me, I'm not judging it.
Has anybody ever done interpretive dance?
They've done poetry, they've done songs, it's very creative. And they all, when they go into it, they're all like, oh, I can't do this, I'm not creative. I don't have a creative bone in my body. And that's the person who presents the most creative piece.
Every single time. Yeah.
So I'm sitting there, I'm applauding them because I'm thinking like, my God, you said you weren't creative, but yet you just presented like this, oh my God, piece of whatever.
Yeah.
And it's amazing.
Now, do they have to write anything
They
reflecting on?
verbally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
First year course, this is overwhelming enough for them as it is.
Yeah. Scare them in increments,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But they do link it to a term paper.
Okay. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, that also gives further opportunities. Anybody else? Anything else that people have used that you think you can understand as Yeah, Beth.
We were talking about an exercise in University 1010, which was this
Yep.
introduction to the university experience. So one of the things students had to do was do a group presentation at the end of the semester based on research they'd done on a particular topic. So before we started that, I got them to do a team building exercise where, I don't know if you guys have heard of it, the marshmallows and spaghetti sticks, and you give them these materials and say, build the highest freestanding tower you can build out of this material.
I want to play.
And I'm going to be Kathy.
It's fascinating to see what comes out, because there's always the competitive one who wants to make the highest tower.
Yeah.
And then people, like one person steps in and becomes the overseer and starts to strategize. And then one person plays a supportive role. It's like, okay, you do that, I'll hand this. And so just to see the ways that the students start to identify their roles. And then afterwards, I got them to write a reflection on it to say, what did you get out of this experience? And sometimes it was, the person who ran it wasn't very good. So sometimes it'll be like that. Or it'll be just thinking about what role they played, and could they play a different role, or do they normally play a different role in their activities? So it was a helpful experience.
Okay. Spagoot is short form for spaghetti at my house, and it's fewer letters. So welcome to Spagoot. So it's a Spagoot marshmallow tower.
Just Google it and you'll see the video that shows
Okay.
how to do it.
All right, cool. Any other things? Yeah, Ailsa.
I was once a coordinator for several years for the graduate program in teaching, and at the end of the 13-week series of seminars, we asked the graduate students to, again, artistically, visually represent either their experience in the course, their growth as a teacher, or their understanding of the roles and responsibilities of teaching. And like you, we get everything from baking to skits to three-dimensional sculptures, and the student then is asked to talk about their transformation to the rest of the class as they describe their piece.
And when you said skits, I've also used this for exam review in larger classes. So where we've had actually in this room, where people got, and everybody got assigned and they had to do a skit that was for exam review on different sections of it. The number of people who did impersonations of me was a little bit of a problem, and some of them were really good. So, but they also did better on the exam because they'd done that. And then there are all sorts of other transferable skills that come up. Yeah.
I do have a question. Is this kind of activity in the way you use it, is it typically as a capstone type of project, or can maybe smaller pieces, is it like something that you described, something that might be too big and too scary right at the beginning of a course or in the early weeks of the course? In your example, is this at the end of the course?
That is at the end of the course. But the midterm exam happened right before the midterm, that exam review, so doing things in skits. I also have, it's very standard. There are all sorts of things that we already do which we might not think about as translation, but which are when you ask people to hand in, this often happens in graduate courses, sort of a very brief critical reflection on each of the readings. So you come in at the beginning of class and you hand that in, right? I think I made you do that. That's part of what it is, and that is another. It's more exercise. Now it doesn't look as scary as make me some art, right? But I do say I do not want you to summarize the readings, right? I want you to respond to the readings, right? And then we can talk about response. Tom?
One example we were talking about that I use, but probably not as cool, definitely not as cool as what you do, but it was just using role play and Untitled Dilemmas.
That's very cool.
Yeah, so because business ethics can be pretty dry, but there's all the theories and stuff. So we put in a role play. You were the manager of, we were thinking I was creating one, saying you're the manager of foreign government wants to give you a project for $500,000, but you have to hire one of the sons of one of the deputy ministers and help his daughter also get into university here because she wants to know what you do. And so that helps translate on a couple of different levels. And it can be very short or very long.
Yeah, and that. So I know there's not a hope that you can see this from back there, but there's verbal, linguistic, mathematical, logical, musical, visual, spatial, bodily, kinesthetic, interpersonal, naturalist. Anything of these that you've said, you can parse it out and you can figure it out. So the whole point of even talking about who cares about this concept of translation? Oh, nice, Ailsa, great. You got a concept, right? But I was thinking I was going to do this with my students. Just parse it out for a second, right? We all are busy often with a whole bunch of other things we need to do. So one of the things that people often complain about with trying to do work with more critically engaged teaching and teaching and learning is, I don't have the time to do all this. Of course, we could all be brilliant teachers if we had all the time in the world, so I'm trying to find a tool that makes it be a little bit more efficient. I have an idea for an assignment. Does it translate between one of these? Yes? You're probably good to go, right? So it's like it's a check, right? It's a check and balance and a way to look at it and a way to streamline what you're doing, and a way to understand. You're like, wow, this really worked, and I'm not sure why. Oh, well, look, maybe I did this. Because it seems to be that in a lot of the cases, that's how it happens. Does it seem helpful to you to think of it in that way? Okay, it's not just me. I'm glad. Oh, wait a minute. That's not what I want yet, is it? No, we'll just stay there. What I'm hoping that I've shown convincingly that incorporating translation exercises and assignments provides opportunities for students to navigate the material in ways that support or necessitate moving beyond just regurgitating information or just teaching to the test, right? So I'm trying to find ways to encourage creative thinking and really put learners in the driver's seat. And this is part of the key to how translation can create transformation, because we don't always present content that challenges assumptions in ways that create the shifts that lead to a change in self that some of the literature on transformative learning, if you look at it, is, I'm like, wow, we have to recognize the soul and uncover it. And I'm like, dude, I've got a Tuesday and Thursday class at 9 o'clock in the morning. I don't know how I'm going to recognize the soul and uncover it. Like, this is not really what I think I can be up to. But it's not just the content that can be transformational, because teaching is never just about the content, right? When you think about the teachers you've had which have really helped develop who you are as a learner, it was never really about the content, right? One of the people who I learned the most from in graduate school was totally outside of my area, who thought that everything I do is anti-sociological nonsense. And I'm saying it without swearing, because that's not, but he taught me so much about how it is to be an academic and how to disagree and how to build things, right? So that there are all sorts of different things that we're teaching. And if you have assignments that acknowledge how learning is a way of creating knowledge, not just receiving it, that can transform how people move through the world. So thinking of the work that students are doing as the work of being translators can help us maintain really learner-focused classrooms, and also plays with the power dynamic in the classroom in ways that can prove to be really productive and really interesting, and that can challenge assumptions that they might have about themselves as learners and about the process of learning itself. So the key here is that when you ask your students to create a translation, you do not know the answer before they create it. Or as I often say to my students, don't tell me what's in the book. I've read the book and I can go to the library, but I can't take your brain out of the library. I want to know what you're thinking. And I want them to teach me how they see the material. And I want them to be tour guides and translators. And I'm happy to be a passenger on their bus. And I may have set parts of the route, but it's really fun to watch them transform as they learn how to drive. Now, I'll say thank you. We have space for 1 minute of questions, which is so learner-centered. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Hi. How do you get students to actually engage with this? Because I feel like I've worked at the Center for Collaborative Health and Professional Education, big mouthful, but I feel that we do a lot of things that pull on these things, like we do reflection, we do creative group assignments, but we still get the same, 5 answers. Students are just telling us, regurgitating back to us what they think we want to hear. Even if it is a self-reflection, even if we have no way of knowing what they might create at the end of that or what they might have taken away from it, they still tell us the same, 5 things that they think we want to hear from them. So how do you get students to really engage with this kind of activity?
What I have done is I have told them, can I use the collage assignment as an example again? And I can use another thing that I do often, which is a debate, which we do in class. The collage example, I tell them if, for example, Goffman's front stage, back stage, what I put out here and then what I do to get ready to put it out here. If what you do is you build a stage and say, this is the front stage and this is the back stage, well, there's a solid C. Yeah. I tell them that they will not do well. Right? I'm like, that is almost a direct representation. If you build me a stage out of popsicle sticks and you talk about how it's important that it's made of individual pieces, which has glue, which is water soluble, then you've done the assignment, right? So, but I try and really unpack it along the way, right? And at the graduate level, one of the things that I'm like, I want you to learn by taking risks that you will never be allowed to take again. Go ahead. Write for me a grand theory of culture. Go for it. I know you're going to be wrong. You know you're going to be wrong. That's fine. Think how much you can learn by being wrong. You can't afford to be wrong ever again. Once you get this degree, everything's going onto your CV for your T&P file, and you're screwed if you're wrong, right? So trying to really be clear about that. And I give them Bloom's taxonomy on the back of every syllabus. And we talk about how that is the secret rubric for all university grading. That even if people don't know that they're using it, that they're using it.
Ailsa, did you show your students in the current semester work that students have done in past semesters?
Yep.
As a way of,
Yeah, I always ask for samples from people as they've done. Like, can I use these? Can I show these to people? So, yeah. So they see examples and they see ones which are like the fancy pants ones, like this. But then they also see the ones which are. But that's just a picture of a flower drawn not very well with some pencil crayons. Yeah, but it's really cool about socialization. Where you see what each petal means, right? So it works differently that way.